Today we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to GB News Breakfast, voted by you as the nation's best multi-channel news programme at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Well, hello there, it's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs and Co. Time flies, doesn't it, when you are having fun. Rishi Sunak, though, I bet he's not been having much fun over the last 6 months. Can you believe that's how long he has been in power? I wonder if he ever regrets his decision to be our Prime Minister. I want to know from you tonight, how is he getting on his 5 pledges? Do you remember what they even are? How is he doing? And one of the MPs today in trouble because, get this everyone, controversially, he says MPs should have their salary doubled. You heard it, doubled. He says he'll halve the number that we've got, but what he's basically saying is we need top drawer people, he reckons. The only people that are top drawer these days are the people that are earning the big bucks. Is he right? Or is that an elitist attitude? And did you hear the nonsense about the Bank of England saying that basically anyone of any gender can get pregnant? I mean, give me a break. Anyway, the reason they're all doing it is because companies are absolutely obsessed, I tell you guys, with Stonewall and their equality index in the workplace. Why? What is going on? And do you drive a car? You will be aware then, of course, of the clean air charges up and down the country. Protests in London today about that. Is it time to scrap them? Some saying it is a tax on the poor. Speaking of the poor, by the way, Johnny Mercer, he's in trouble because he reckons that a lot of the people that are using food banks are doing it because they're doing it to budget, and that is a personal decision and not because of poverty. Controversial, but is it true? We've got it all coming your way, but before we get into it, let's grab the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Michelle, thank you. Well, good evening to you. Within the last hour, we've learned the chair of the Privileges Committee, Tory MP Sir Bernard Jenkin, could be facing a police investigation into a lockdown party at Conservative Party headquarters. In the last few minutes, Sir Bernard has responded, putting out a statement saying it's not appropriate to comment on a continuing police investigation. Well, the Met will be reopening their look at the Jingle and Mingle lockdown party at Conservative Party HQ, which we understand took place on the 8th of December 2020. The Tory MP, Sir Bernard Jenkin, is said to have been there. 2 COVID regulations potentially being broken during that party. That a developing story. We'll bring more to you as we get it. Well, the Prime Minister's been refusing to comment today on when he will fulfil his promise to stop small boat crossings across the English Channel. But he's denied the plan is on hold amid the legal obstacles stopping the government's plan to process migrants in Rwanda. Being questioned today by senior MPs, Rishi Sunak denied there's no plan B if the Supreme Court does not overturn the ruling, which currently blocks the removal of migrants to Rwanda. He says ministers will challenge the appeal court ruling confidently and vigorously. Well, in news away from politics today, junior doctors have voted within the last hour and a half to extend their strike action until at least January 2024. Members of the Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association in England decided to extend their strike action by another 6 months, with 96.5% voting in favour of that. The reballot result comes as junior doctors prepare to walk out for 5 days in July. They're going to be taking industrial action between the 13th and 18th of this month. The Prime Minister says, though, the strikes are making NHS waiting lists longer.
Already had 500,000 people's care be impacted by industrial action, and I don't think that's right. I think everyone can see the economic context that we're in and the necessity for the government to make responsible decisions.
Teachers' unions are calling on the government to release recommendations on pay made by an independent body. EU members in England are staging fresh strikes tomorrow and then again on Friday in their ongoing dispute over pay. All 4 education unions rejected the government's latest offer of £1,000 lump sum and a 4.5% pay rise. Now, Thames Water has been fined £3.3 million for polluting 2 rivers back in 2017. The company pleaded guilty, admitting to discharging millions of litres of undiluted sewage into the Gatwick Stream in Sussex and the River Mole in Surrey over the course of 6.5 hours. The incident killed more than 1,400 fish. The judge said she believed Thames Water had also demonstrated a deliberate attempt to mislead the Environment Agency over the incident. The average rate for a 5-year fixed-rate mortgage deal has now moved above 6%. The number of mortgage deals on the market has also dropped, driving up costs for home buyers and home owners. And it comes as the UK's 4 major banks have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering, with savings rates lagging behind the cost of mortgages by around 4%. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says families are struggling to meet their costs. Now, the family of a mother and 2 children who died in a fire that ripped through a flat in Nottingham say they're relieved the killer has been brought to justice. Jamie Barrow has been found guilty of murdering his neighbour, Fatoumata Haidara, and her 2 young daughters last year. The court heard he poured petrol through their letterbox before setting it alight and watching the fire take hold. Prosecutors said Barrow had a grievance over rubbish being left in an alleyway. Technology news now. And Meta, the company that owns Facebook, is launching a new app to rival Twitter. It's called Threads and is described as a text-based conversation app that will also be linked to Instagram. It appears to closely resemble its main competitor, Twitter, and it's the latest chapter in the rivalry between Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, who bought Twitter at the end of last year. Twitter recently announced unverified users, in other words, those who don't pay a subscription, will be limited to viewing 600 posts a day. Now, His Majesty the King and his Queen wished the NHS a happy 75th birthday today. Their Majesties visiting the Royal Infirmary at Edinburgh to celebrate the anniversary. They met patients and staff and unveiled a specially commissioned plaque to mark the occasion. Her Majesty the Queen joked that the NHS shared the same birthday as her, as they both celebrate their birthdays in July. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, the People's Channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I found that story that you just did fascinating about the social media network. Another one, I feel like Brenda in Bristol, do you remember her? Why do we need yet another social media platform? What happened to just getting out and about and talking to people in the real world? That's what I want to know. Maybe I'm just getting old. Anyway, talk to people in the real world we will do right through till 7 o'clock tonight, because alongside me, the PR consultant Alex Dean and the journalist and author Ella Whelan keep me company. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening to you.
And you know the drill, don't you? It's not just about us three here. It is very much about you guys at home. What is on your mind tonight? You can get in touch all the usual ways. GBviews at gbnews.com is the email, or you can tweet me at GBnews. Got it all going on tonight. Rishi Sunak. I want to talk to you about the suggestion that's been made. Controversial. Get this, Johnny Mercer, he's saying that people are using food banks not because they're so skint they can't afford a loaf of bread, everyone. He reckons it's because people are budgeting that way, basically. That is why they're heading that way. He's got in a bit of trouble for that, I can tell you. But is he simply speaking the truth? Your thoughts on all of that. But get this, everybody, it flies, doesn't it, time when you're having fun. Rishi Sunak, he has been our PM for 6 months. Do you remember his 5 pledges that he made to us? I could have tested you, but do you know what? It's my top story, so I'm going to get straight in and I'm going to assume that you all know them. But shall we recap and look at how he is doing? Inflation. Of course, that is one of his key tasks. He said he wanted to halve it. Well, of course, it remains at 8.7%. So he's not really doing well on that, is he? We've just avoided a recession, a technical recession in June. We've got national debt 100% above GDP. Record high, of course, since 1961. On and on we go. So he's not doing too well in terms of the 2 and 3, the economic growth and the debt falling. When it comes to cutting NHS waiting lists, well, I've got to say, I don't really think he's doing that great on that either. And stopping the small boats. Do not make me laugh, everybody. Nearly 11,000 crossings so far this year. One of the busiest in June since, well, actually, I think since records began. Goodness gracious me, Alex, I've got to say, when I look at those 5 points there and I reflect briefly on how he's doing, I've got to say, for me, it is a very poor, I'd say 1 out of 10.
I'd say work in progress, and of course he's going to be inviting the electorate to judge him at the time of the next election, not now. But it's very hard to look at where things stand and say that everything is rosy, isn't it? You will recall when these 5 pledges were announced that they were treated by some people in the media as if the government had chosen targets that were deliberately easy to meet. True. So that by the time they came about, government will be able to say, ta-da, all 5 of them be done. As we're seeing, it's not going everything in the Prime Minister's way. I would say this, though. You're right to say that we have avoided recession narrowly. Most of our neighbours are in recession, including many of the significant Euro nations. Inflation is higher than the government would want, but higher still in a number of our competitor markets. The debt one is within government's control and has been very sticky, but debt is higher still in some of our competitor markets. But all of that said, so I think you can see some progress on those targets. The one that really matters, it's like a 4+1. The one that really matters, certainly for the Prime Minister's vote, is the boats one. Stopping the small boats is basically the main test for this government. And I would say that if they aced that and they failed on the other 4, the government would still go into the election in a positive position. And if they aced the other 4 and failed on that one, they'd go into the next election in a really poor position.
Really?
So actually, there's one that I think really matters in an outsized manner.
So you think if inflation was still running rampant, people still couldn't get into the NHS hospitals, but everyone, worry not, because the boats have stopped. You think people go, OK?
No, I think that if they could show some progress on the other 4, as they are now, but miles from complete, but had nailed the boats one, the government would be in a strong position.
What do you think, Ella, your thoughts?
I don't know, I think the Conservatives are trying to console themselves with the idea that the small boats thing is going to save them at the on the doorstep or come election time. I don't think it's that simple. I do think it's a big issue. I think people care about controlling borders. But to say, I think the interesting thing is that of all these pledges, almost all of them, bar the grow economy one, which is kind of tokenistic. He had to have something like that in there. They're all quite negative. Halving inflation, cut bit of debt, cut a bit of the waiting times, stop the small boats. It's all making things slightly less terrible. And there's not a lot of positive, ambitious dynamism in there. That's why people took the mick out of him at the start. It reminds me of, was it Ed Miliband's tablet gravestone thing? It's, you know, this kind of...
He hasn't put it on a stone yet.
Yeah, well, there's a kind of dread to it all, and I think that this is the problem with Rishi Sunak, is that, and I mean, obviously the Conservative government, but in particular him, is that he's sold himself as, you know, post-Boris, post-Liz Truss, a kind of calm, collected technocrat, someone who is sensible and get the job done and keep things on an even keel. That's not what we need at the moment. I'm not saying that we need another Johnson, you know, kind of mad chaos, but you need some kind of ambitious, large-scale plan for change. None of these 5 pledges came close to that, and the fact that he hasn't even managed to come anywhere near any of them, I think, just proves the point that we all knew from the start, that this guy is not someone who's going to change the country, change the world. He's not even going to, you know, he'd probably have to change his pledges, but they all do that.
Well, there's no chance that the pledges get changed. The government's repeated them, you know, ad infinitum. The pledges are with the Prime Minister until the next election. I suppose the point to make is, like any undertaking that somebody's making, that isn't an immediate delivery task. You've got to judge it at the end, not in the middle.
Is that fair, do you think? Are you willing to wait until the end? Because I don't know about you at home, right? I was reminiscing about this with my mum at the weekend. I told you this yesterday. We were saying at the weekend, we cannot remember life in this country being as bad as this. You cannot get in to see a doctor. You cannot get into your hospital. You cannot get a reaction when you ring the police in an emergency more often than not. People's finances are absolutely squeezed. People are panicked about their houses, retaining the mortgages that they've got, or getting hold of a new one. Mental health through the roof. The country is in an absolute mess, and from a non-technical standpoint, I can't remember it ever being this bad.
Yeah, well, I don't want to sound like a Labour politician here, but it's true that we are basically at the end of this. I mean, even Conservatives themselves, there's so many rumours spilling out of Westminster about how many Tory MPs are saying, we're going to lose this election, you know, we need a bit of time in opposition to sharpen ourselves up. It's a given, you know, stories across the weekend papers about people looking at their Red Wall MPs looking at their CVs and stuff like that. We are at the end of a long, long period of time of Conservative Party being in power, and it has been utter failure after failure. And, you know, Michelle has just given a long list of all the problems we're facing in this country. I don't know who will come along and fix them, but it certainly isn't going to be Rishi Sunak.
Right. So that narrative that you've just set out, and I can see there is a lot of that chatter around Westminster, that's true, but there was equally a lot of that chatter around Westminster in 1991, following the failed Back to Basics campaign. John Major's government was regarded as finished. Everything was going to come to a halt. Neil Kinnock was going to become our Prime Minister. Come 1992, the people who'd said all that with great confidence looked rather silly, and the Conservative Party had pulled things out of the bag. Now, I'm not saying that will happen. I'm saying that the people who say it's definitely not going to happen are really speaking from a position that is very unclear to me. And when you rely on the fact that there's plenty of discontent in and around Westminster and individual MPs may say one thing or another, well, that's no proof of anything. In the end, the electorate will decide things based on what they see when they come to vote. Not now, but when the pollers.
Well, one of the narratives that gets discussed often is around food banks and how many food banks. They seem to be popping up absolutely everywhere these days, don't they? Johnny Mercer, veterans guy, he is in trouble, veterans minister, I should say, to give him his correct and proper title. He's basically talking about people that use food banks. He's saying that actually often it's not because people literally cannot afford a potato or a bag of crisps or a loaf of bread. He reckons it's more down to a kind of budgeting, personal choice. What do you make to that, Ella?
Well, you know, it's true that some people use food banks as a kind of a top-up. You don't have to be literally scrapping on the ground for crusts of bread. There are people who who need to supplement what they're bringing home to eat on the basis of that. So perhaps he has something of. I don't know the particular case of the RAF. There's this rumour that, well, there's news that people are accessing services there. But I just wanted to read out something that he's quoted in The Guardian as saying, and this, I think, encapsulates the whole way in which politicians, particularly in the Conservative Party, are approaching the issue of low standards of living. He said, I don't want to see anyone using food banks. Of course I don't, but we're in an extremely difficult time around the cost of living. He's talking about an economic crisis like it's the weather, like it's something that he has no control of, that his party has no control of. It's not their fault. It's nothing to do with us, and we've all just got to kind of tighten our belts and weather the storm. And that's that's obviously not true. It's also pretty insulting that politicians seem to just be pointing over their shoulder saying it's not my fault, it's something going on over there. So I think he's talking rubbish.
I don't think anyone can pretend that politicians generally quite often get the tone wrong on things like food banks. That's true. But in specifically Johnny Mercer's case on this, I think people should be fair. We should be fair. He was talking specifically about serving military personnel and whether they were using food banks. And his position, people are entitled to disagree with it, but his position was that all serving military personnel are paid well enough that if they are using food banks, that is a matter of choice and poor budgeting rather than necessity. That was the position that he was setting. I think I do, but that was the position that he was setting out. And we ought to be, he wasn't talking about society generally, and we shouldn't just say it as if he's just being laissez-faire or blasé about people using food banks.
So he's specific about military, but other Tory MPs have made more broader statements, haven't they, about food bank usage, where it has been a more broad brush approach.
Yeah, and there I think quite often people have a remarkable tin ear, and I wouldn't choose to say the sorts of things that some members of Parliament say, and people may use food banks for all sorts of reasons. But when it comes to the Mercer example, what we were discussing, we shouldn't just discuss it as if he was talking about population at large. He was talking about those people employed by the state to defend our country, and he was making, I don't know why he's rowing back from it, because actually it seems a completely defensible position, no pun intended, defensible position in my view, which is that all of our serving military personnel are paid well enough not to have to use food banks.
Well, the reason...
And if that's not true, you certainly want it to be, right?
The reason he's rowing back on that, or will be partially rowing back on that, is because you dare to speak what I would say is basic common sense in this country, because you might say I'm heartless or cruel or whatever, and I know that there are a segment of society that are struggling right now. I know that, I get it. We've got a welfare state as well that really helps support people at the very lowest income levels or no income levels at all. But if you say to someone that's only got 50 quid disposable income or 30 quid disposable income or whatever, right, you've got to get this, you've got to get that, you've got to get this. But if you want, instead of spending your last £10 on food, you can get all your food free from over there and you can spend your tenner on whatever, then of course you're going to go get your food free from over there. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I wouldn't blame people. I think, that it's a particularly miserable kind of existence where you don't have any spare cash to, I don't know, buy your kid a new toy or get yourself a new jumper or any of these things. I think probably that's what stands out to me in all of this. I mean, I don't know, can food banks really be set up in places where all the service men and women are, I don't know what, blowing it on going out? I mean, there must be some kind of issue going on here. But
I remember a story about the RAF, and what people were saying, this was a little while ago, they were saying they were quoting a specific barracks, and they were saying that there was this food bank that had been set up by the military personnel to support the wider community, which was now being used by the military personnel themselves. There was a big outrage about it. But then actually, I sat there and thought, well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, this, because if you're on this base, you've got your housing costs largely taken care of. I imagine you've got subsidised food and all the rest of it. So yes, maybe there are a few people who have got themselves into debt or trouble or whatever that need to use that facility or choose to use that facility or whatever. But to your point, it's not symptomatic then of a whole issue.
But isn't... Sorry, Alex, go ahead. No, I was just going to say that this is the level at which we're having a conversation about people's standard of living, that, whether or not they're going to food banks, that is just, it's such small fry. It's so depressing. We should be having a discussion about the economy in which we're aiming higher and saying people should have more, an excess.
Well, Morris, one of my viewers, he's written in and said, Michelle, please can you ask your panel a simple question? So I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to go to the break. So
ready for Morris's question.
You can answer this question as well at home if you want. Morris is asking, how do you define poverty? Yes, that is the question. Ponder it, and I'll see you in 2.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, till 7 o'clock tonight, alongside me, PR consultant Alex Dean and the journalist and author Ella Whelan. Morris got involved. He was asking both of you, what is the definition, or your definition, of poverty? How would you define it?
There are 2 ways of defining poverty. The first is absolute poverty. People not having enough to eat, not having enough to keep themselves warm, not having a place to stay. That's a definition that is objective, and it's one with which I agree. The second definition of poverty is so-called relative poverty, which is people who are below the 60% of the median income in society at any given time. The left prefers the latter because, first of all, it means that there'll always be a big part of society which is always in poverty, no matter how well we do as a society, and it propels a narrative of inequality. Indeed, it rocket fuels a narrative of inequality, because if we do well as a society and high earners do extremely well and pay more tax as a result, and we have more money as a country, then that group of people below 60% of the median income may grow. So I prefer the former, which is a group of people, very small in society, and we've done incredibly well on it, who are in absolute poverty, who we should definitely seek to help. The left prefer this narrative of those below 60% of median income, which will always be with us, can never be fixed, and no matter how well we do as a society, will always prop up their arguments.
Well, that told you, Morris. Ella, how would you answer that?
I don't know. Maybe I think that's a bit cynical, Alex, about the left. But I think pretty simply it's that people... poverty is defined by people who can't manage a basic standard of living. And I think that our understanding of what a basic standard of living has to change. I was just eavesdropping on a different part of the programme, talking about a cashless society in which you wouldn't say that you would be poverty-stricken if you didn't have a smartphone these days. It's a luxury item. But as society changes to a situation in which to do anything basic, from park to buy your shopping, with Apple Pay and things like that, having a phone is an essential, then I think you have to shift the terms of the frame.
Well, no, I think Ella has a point about that, because people who don't use online services very often don't receive discounts that people who do use those services get. So, ironically, the people who are worst off don't get offered the discounts that would benefit them as a proportion of income the most. There is a real point there.
Yeah.
What do you make to that? Is a smartphone essential? And do you agree with those 2 definitions of poverty? Morris, I do suspect, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think there'll be a lot of people at home, for example, saying, a lot of people, they'll go to a food bank, so I know X, Y and Z, they'll go to a food bank, but they'll simultaneously have X, Y and Z and go to A, B and C, and perhaps that is a mindset that is coming through on my inbox. Do you agree with that? Is it harsh or fair? Your thoughts on that? Let's speak, shall we? Poverty and cash, because I'll tell you, people that are not really struggling right now, it is, of course, our MPs. Sajid Javid, he's been speaking out about how much they get paid. As a reminder, it's about £86,000. And now Sajid Javid has basically said that figure needs to double. But he's got a plan. What he would do is he would halve the number of MPs that you've got. So he would argue that that would be cost neutral. The whole point of what he's trying to say is basically if you get someone earning currently, say, £30,000 a year that's going to get this monumental salary jump to £86,000, they're going to feel like they've won the lottery. But he's arguing that those people might not come with the skills that Parliament needs. He reckons if you go sniffing around the high earners and you attract them with a higher salary, Parliament will be in a better place. Do you agree?
No. I don't know, Alex, you're in PR. I mean, this seems like the most crazy statement to make at a time when the Conservatives are in need of all the public support they can get. You know, annoy the public by saying that politicians should get more money, which is very rarely ever a good line to take, and freak out your own MPs by suggesting that potentially half of them are going to be slashed under this new idea. But on the issue itself, I don't think that politicians need very much more money. I also think this is a completely technocratic approach to solving the issue of politics. So the issue of politics is not a dearth of high earners with, I don't know, business skills or something like that, even as important as that is. It's a lack of politics with a capital P. It's a lack of ideas, which it seems to me someone on 30,000, he's basically saying anyone between 30,000 and 80,000 isn't going to have the skill set to be able to do well to do what Parliament needs, he says. Well, I mean, I don't earn a huge amount. I'd say I'd probably do a bit better of a job than a lot of the people in there, and that's not just me blowing smoke up my own backside. I think there are lots of people with ideas, with a sense of how to kind of change politics rather than just change the makeup of politicians. And I think it tells you something about the way in which this current government is approaching the crises that we have, is that everything is to do with tweaking technocratic issues rather than wholesale change.
You've certainly got a point about the inwardness of many politicians' views, but let's be clear, this is a politician who's about to become an ex-politician. He feels free to say this because he's not going to run again at the next election. And that's why suddenly, having been quite careful and measured in his announcements for years, our former Chancellor, pow, 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 I think we should cut half of the MPs, I think they should be paid double, like he's just, free at last, I can say what I like. And this is the kind of thing that motivates him. But looks very unfashionable. I think he's got a point. If you look at our international competitors, we significantly underpay our members of Parliament. It's not a popular position. Ella's right, doesn't win you any plaudits with anyone, but I regard it as true. I also think there's something quite interesting here that cuts across party lines. Our political class in Westminster looks increasingly like real horse racing enthusiasts. The very wealthy and the really quite poor. The very wealthy because they don't need the money that you get from being an MP, and the relatively badly off because for them it's a pay rise, and you're missing almost everyone in the middle, and we're hollowing out politics when we do that. When a headmaster would take a big pay cut to go and be an MP, that's when you realise actually we've got this a bit wrong.
Two things jump out to me in what he was saying. Firstly, his assumption that if someone's earning 30 grand and then someone's earning, I don't know, 100 grand already, that somehow this 100 grand person is more talented and all the rest of it than the 30 grand person. Because I have worked in business and I've come across a variety of different people, management level and all the rest of it, and they are absolute numpties. And I look at them and I think, how on God's green earth have you got to that position of earning this salary and you don't have much about you? So I would push back on that notion. But also, I think, and you're in PR, I think that there's very few people that have got something about them that would comfortably go into politics in this day and age, because most people, they've had a little bit of a past, they've kind of been here and done there. That's the kind of people that I would want in politics. You've been there, you've done this, But woe betide you if the media gets hold of any of that. They'd hound you out of office.
And you've been on, let's say you've been in the media for some time. There's no doubt some clip of you saying something that will come across badly out of context a decade after you've said it. I'm sure that that's the case. But what's the flip side? What we get is bland automata who've done nothing but toe a party line, preferably whilst working for that party, on their way up to becoming an MP. And basically you get the politicians you deserve, and that's the kind of system we're increasingly encouraging.
Are we getting the people we deserve, do you reckon? It's best of the bunch?
Well, certainly until there is I don't know, there's how many new subsets of the Conservatives are there at the moment having their own conferences.
Yeah, there was one the other day, wasn't there? Yeah.
But until there is a new party of I don't know what kind, with I don't know what sort of ideas, I could probably guess at what I would put forward, but I'm not in the business of doing that. Someone puts forward some kind of new ideas, then I think the people will follow. Or, it's a kind of an amalgam situation in which you need some people with some sense of an ideology. I think part of the problem, this is, OK, Javid's on his way out and he's having a bit of fun with it, but this is the kind of technocratic approach that so many of our politicians, and actually in Europe and in other countries, are too, which is the way to settle political problems is to do this kind of tweaking of the system of the way things work, rather than actually looking at what it is about politics that we want to change, what it is about people's lives we want to change.
I think there's some truth in that, but there's another point to be made in it, which is that, and it crosses party lines, there was an unspoken truth in Westminster that it was basically agreed between the parties that it was bad to raise MPs' salaries because it looked bad for them all round. So what they would do as a result is that they would have a generous approach to expenses. And then over time, those MPs, having done what they thought was the right thing to do, they were roundly criticised. We had the expenses scandal and a whole shed load of them went out. Now, it's wrong to abuse expenses, of course, and it was right that the system, especially with the more egregious examples, rooted out those who had done so. But the quid pro quo should have been that we should have honestly said as a society, OK, we've stopped all this abuse of expenses. The right thing to do is put MP salaries up. But, of course, it was the very worst time to have that conversation because we've just been through the expenses scandal.
But you
didn't
see,
happen.
to have those conversations as well, in my opinion, takes some chops, because the media, you know that if you come out, whenever you say it's never going to land well, is it? Whenever you come out and say, right, an MP deserves X, Y, Z, or should be getting X, Y, Z, you'll always receive pushback. And I think this is one of the challenges that MPs need to be better at, which is pushing back against some of the media narratives. I would like to see politicians be more bolder. When they go on these international conferences, you get journalists saying, oh, can I just ask you about so-and-so party? Well, no, actually, no, you can't. I'm here to talk about Ukraine or whatever. But they don't. They pander to the media. And I know I shouldn't say that because I sit in the media, but I feel that.
Yeah, maybe you've got a point there, but I mean, at the moment, when politicians from both the Conservative and the Labour Party are talking to striking workers and saying, no, you cannot have a pay rise, then it's illegitimate for them to ask for one themselves. In an economy that was booming, I'd have no problem adding a zero onto their paycheck, whatever.
God, you lot at home are getting onto into the gist of this, aren't you? When I say it's not just about us, it is about you. You're taking this very literally, and I like it. Ian says, I've got another question for your panel as they go into the break. I like what you're doing there, Ian. Please, can you ask your panel their view on what qualifications do you think should be required to be an MP? Interesting question there. These guys will answer that after the break. You can tell me your thoughts on that as well. But I also want to ask, why are so many companies obsessed with pandering to Stonewall? You tell me.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness
to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching. Hello there, I am Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, we've got Alex Dean, the PR consultant, and the journalist and author Ella Whelan. It's not just about us, it is about you. You're getting into the swing of it, and I like it. Ian, he's in Cyprus at the moment, and he's asking, ask the panel what they feel should be qualifications to be an MP. Alex?
There should be no formal qualifications for being a Member of Parliament other than being elected by your electorate. If I think about the electorate tells you something when they elect people. If I think of the extremes in Northern Ireland of people who come from the community but had a background in sectarian violence, it told the world something about what's happening in their community there. And the notion that the state should concoct a qualification that means you can't get in is for the birds for me. But I go further. In the mid-20th century, across all of 3 of the historically dominant parties, some 18% of people's backgrounds was manual labour. Today in Parliament, it is 0. Do we think we've got a better Parliament today as a result? I do not. Equally, 1980s, the background of people who are MPs, 3% used to work for their party before they got elected. Today it's 10 times that, 30%. We think it's better because people used to be spads and aides. I don't. So the idea that people should have a formal qualification for going into Parliament, for me, is completely wrong.
For the birds, Ella?
I agree. I think that anything that kind of hems in what people previously need to have proved removes all the spontaneity and the flexibility in politics. But also Alex has a point, which is that there is a lot of talk about whether or not we need quotas for women, even quotas for sort of working class people. There's a lot of people in Labour often like to say, we need more working class people in politics, which is a very instrumental approach. You know, like I say, the point I made before, the politics has to come first and then the people will follow. There has to be some big ideas. So any kind of instrumental technocratic approach to these kind of issues is always going to fail.
There you go. And you didn't tell me your answer as to what you thought they needed qualification-wise. Get in touch and let me know. I'm interested in your view. Also, as well, it's not just MPs. I find it quite interesting who gets appointed to what ministerial roles. You find someone getting, I don't know, Minister for Transport. You look at them, he's never done anything to do with transport in all of his life. And I think, well, that's a particular niche skill set. So surely you might have a little bit of a background in it, or maybe not. And also, what about qualifications of people like special advisors? I always found that a little bit weird, these special advisors. There seem to be about 12. I don't really know where they come from. And if you ask me, that seems to be a very closed shop as well. That is one, perhaps, for another day. Alex is doing an intake of breath. He's about to crack into it. But I can tell you what, I've got a topic I need to get off my chest before the end of the show, so I need to move on. Stonewall. Have you seen the story about the Bank of England? They're basically saying that any gender or any person can become pregnant. This, it turns out, was a view that it included in its 2022 submission to be included in the list of 100 top employers published by Stonewall. I find this whole obsession with Stonewall really odd. I feel like it permeates so many aspects of society, whether it's education in schools, whether it's policies within the workplace and beyond. What is this obsession with Stonewall about?
Well, I mean, Stonewall was historically and previously, a serious organisation that was set up for a particular political and civil rights purpose.
That's right.
And it's now become essentially a money-making racket. You know, the way in which Stonewall runs its kind of rankings, which corporations and businesses and institutions and all kinds of organisations can sign up to, is that they look through your, I don't know, HR documents and they say, this is too full of mum and dad and boy and girl and all these very, very evil terms. Go away and fix it and come back to us and we'll you know, fund us and we'll give you a lot of training, we'll bring all your employees in and we'll lecture them about how you need to be gender neutral everything. And then come back, show us what you've done, and we'll give you a big gold star. And that basically is how Stonewall functions at the moment. And there are other charities and organisations that do similar things around race or sexism or things like that. So it is not just utterly pointless, it's also promoting the idea that a particularly pernicious political view that, you know, you should call women and mothers birthing people, that you should conflate the idea that...
Red rag to a bull,
that you should, you know, even toy around with the idea that sex isn't real or that it doesn't matter to society, that is simply being taken by the Bank of England, you know, supposedly serious organisation, as just akin to being nice, being fluffy, being pink-washed. I think that's a real problem. It seems like, you know, there can't be any serious adults left at the Bank of England if they think that doing this kind of stuff makes any sense to your average person with a bank account.
I think Ella's prognosis of the grift involved, of the money-making scheme, that's spot on. The pinkwash thing is interesting because, of course, to the point you were making, which is accurate, about there once having been a real mission at the heart of Stonewall, you know, for lesbian people, for gays and bisexuals, it was an organisation that helped a breakthrough to equality with which the overwhelming majority of people in this country, I think, subscribe now. If they didn't in the past, they do now. But it's mission creep from an organisation that still needs to have something to be outraged about and still has to have something cutting edge to complain about. That means you then go out and find the more ultra examples of, in this case, gender ideology, which means you wind up declaring people of any declared gender can be pregnant, which is obviously not true. I mean, I'm a man, I define as a man, and I can't become pregnant. Well, there we are. Yeah, the other thing that...
You'll get cancelled.
The first thing that gets cancelled actually isn't me, it's women. It's the notion that there is such a thing as a woman and we should be able to say that an adult human female is what a woman is. That's what gets cancelled first. I get cancelled second. They're after the women, really. I'm just in the way when I talk about these things.
This Workplace Equality Index, by the way, it's got 9 different categories. It goes through a variety of different things. One of them is you've got to show, like, monitoring, diversity monitoring. So respondents are asked how sexual orientation, gender and trans identity data is analysed to understand the company's recruitment and pay grade and staff satisfaction. Well, I don't mean to be funny. If I went for a job interview and halfway through, the person interviewing me said to me in a roundabout way, who do you sleep with, men or women, I would find that damn right weird, offensive and categorically wrong. But yet these companies are expected to collect that information to be forward-thinking. Policies and benefits, for example, an organisation's got to show how its trans-inclusive policies stretch to things like private health insurance, and on it goes leadership. How do senior managers show understanding of and support for LGBT plus inclusion, and how all managers make LGBTQ plus inclusion part of their day-to-day jobs. I am not gay, right? But if I was, and my manager, how are you going to include me at work because of who I sleep with at home?
Yeah, well, there are cases of people being essentially pushed to become outed because of these kind of things, being asked to, you know, refer to their pronouns and things like that. But I think the more important, the sort of broader point is that you know, if it was the case that we had a series of cases of discrimination, of an organisation saying you cannot, for example, in relation to the Bank of England, a lot of it's about healthcare policy, you cannot have access to our healthcare insurance because of the people you sleep with or because of the way, you know, what name you call yourself, then there would be an issue. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that they are preemptively saying, well, let's just gender neutral wash everything so that no one is offended. But actually, as Alex says, it is offending people. It's offending women.
It's deeply offending people, but if you dare have the audacity to call it out, woe betide you in some cases, which is absolutely categorically wrong. What is driving the Stonewall obsession in your mind? Noble cause once upon a time, now yes, but I'm talking about Stonewall as it is today. Your thoughts on that? I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant Green, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I am Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight alongside my PR consultant Alex Dean and the journalist and author Ella Whelan. Now, 5 London councils are challenging Sadiq Khan's plan to expand ULEZ through Greater London. Now, you might be sitting there, you're not in London, you think, well, what's ULEZ and why do I care about that? I've got to say, these things are popping up all over the UK. I think you can have a look at it now on your screen. They're absolutely everywhere. They might be called something completely different in your town, so I don't know, people call them Les or Zez or whatever it is, but the point of the matter is it's about charging people with older vehicles to get into town. Ella, do you support this?
No, I think that ULEZ and LTNs, that's low traffic neighbourhoods, and all kinds of crackdowns on cars are an abomination. They result in basically a poor tax, and it means that people who aren't able to either afford, well, people who aren't able to afford newer cars or electric cars are run off the road. And stand in full solidarity with the boroughs of Bexley, Bromley, Harrow and Hillingdon, who are going to court to point out the obvious, which is that I don't know if Sadiq Khan has ever been to Bexley, but there is very little public transport there. I mean, I don't want to malign Bexley, but very little. I'm talking waiting hours for a bus kind of situation. And by the way, the people that a lot of the people who live in those boroughs don't have a spare 30 grand for an electric car, and they certainly don't have any charging points on every street. So what you are doing by introducing a ULEZ there is literally putting people under house arrest or condemning them to carry the big shop on their back like a donkey from the supermarket to home. This is outrageous.
I can see the case for an ultra-low emission zone within a very tightly drawn small area of ultra-central touristy London. What I cannot... I mean, some people will disagree with that as well.
Congestion charge, got it.
But even smaller than that for the ULEZ piece. What I cannot see... I was in Hillingdon last week because of the by-election that's coming up. And in Hillingdon, it's a big borough. And, you know, you can get the Elizabeth line to bits of it. But, you know, most people are dependent on their cars. You've got people who don't earn very much money, people who go to the airport to do shift work out of it. They simply cannot do it without their cars. And that's why I think that Steve Tuckwell, the Tory candidate there, is well placed. And unbelievably, the Labour candidate has followed Sadiq Khan down the route of supporting ULEZ. Well, I actually think in that part of the world, it's for the birds. Some people might like it somewhere, but certainly the speed of expansion is what's intolerable. It's the speed of taking it to people who just can't live without their cars in the current setup.
But it's also, I mean, the thing about it, my husband's a tree surgeon, and he goes in, he works a lot in Hackney, and he goes and cuts down people's private clients, and loads of them have LTN posters in their window. They want to have no car zones, and he always says to them, well, do you expect me to carry this trunk on my back down the road to where it's, you know, there is a complete obliviousness to who makes cities run, the kind of people who provide services, whether it's plumbers, care workers, delivery drivers, postmen, all the people who
feel different when their groceries can't be delivered.
Exactly. When their Ocado shop can't get down because there's an LTN or a ULEZ, maybe these people will come out in opposition.
And what fascinates me, by the way, is often they're not trying to ban outright these cars. So what they're saying is, if you can pay to pollute, then that's fine.
Yeah, wealthy
If
enough,
you're that bothered about pollution, then you'd ban the car, wouldn't you?
And vintage cars, which are, you know, extremely expensive to run, are fine. They get a free pass.
Indeed. Well, make of that what you will. Alan says, you've just been talking about Stonewall and the banks and all the rest of it. Why don't banks focus on looking after their customers rather than fiddling around with stuff like this? Here to that. Mark says, Michelle, many of us feel like we're losing the right of freedom of speech. We are frightened to say what we really think on so many issues. I hear you, but that's what we are here for, GB News, to give you guys a voice. Divided on the food bank topic, I've got to say. Frank says, Michelle, great show. Love you two panellists. They're not interrupting or shouting over. Ken says, can I compliment Ella and Alex? The way they've conducted themselves tonight, absolutely fantastic. Well, there you go. Always nice to get viewer feedback. Thank you as well at home. Ella, Alex, come back again soon. Always welcome here on Dewbs & Co. Don't go anywhere. Patrick in for Nigel next. I will be back at 7 o'clock tomorrow. I've got a lot to get off my chest already. I'll have a sleepless night thinking about it. You'll see what I mean at 7 tomorrow. Night-night.
Hello there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. After a soggy Tuesday in many parts, it does turn drier eventually overnight. And it looks like Wednesday will be a fine day for many. Still some showers about, but actually a better chance of some drier and brighter interludes. We've seen the wet weather arrive in the south through the day. That's slow to clear overnight. And with the rain across central and southeastern parts of England, we've got a blustery wind that blows through the channel. And increasingly, that wind is going to affect the Low Countries by the start of Wednesday. Some very strong winds for the likes of the Netherlands and Germany. But across the UK, it does settle down later on with clear spells, but also still a few showers about first thing across parts of Wales, northwest England, eastern Scotland as well. However, for many, it's a better day with longer bright and dry spells, some glimmers of sunlight coming through. And in some spots, actually, it's going to be mostly dry, but there'll still be a scattering of showers out there. And it's still going to be relatively cool compared with much of June. But temperatures are about bang on average. We're looking at 22, 23 Celsius in the south, 18 to 21 further north. Then the showers ease away across central and southern parts of the UK overnight, but they'll keep going across northern and western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well. Thicker cloud towards the northwest and clear spells towards the southeast. But wherever you are, it's a slightly milder night, with most places seeing temperatures stay at 11 to 14 Celsius. Then good prospects for sunshine across the Midlands, eastern and southern England, eastern Scotland first thing Thursday. Elsewhere, the cloud builds, and certainly across western Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England and Wales will see some showers developing before some wetter weather arrives into Northern Ireland, along with a strengthening breeze later Thursday. That continues to affect much of Scotland and Northern Ireland on Friday, whilst the heat builds further south.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's